All right. Can we give God a praise? A clap offering of sorts? Yes. Here we go. I asked them to bring this up here because I thought I would be like sitting and casually preaching and teaching. But I don't know. As I'm here, it's just not the vibe. So I think I'm going to be standing. Okay. Sorry, Joan. I had Joan take it out. Okay, here we go. Um, This will be today's passage, Luke 19, verse 1 to 10. And if you want to take out your own Bibles or just read up on this screen, by all means. But we're going to be talking about a chance to change. And as you flip towards Luke 19, 1 to 10, I want to preface all this to say that change is the proof of your salvation. Change is the proof of your salvation. And that change is a very potent thing. Remember, okay, not to stir up bad memories, but do you remember in 2020 when we used to get alarms on our phones when there was a COVID case in our town? Do you guys remember that? It was the worst. What a weird time. Right? Like what a weird time to live through. But I just thought it was such an interesting thing. And when you get that alarm on your phone that says there's one case now in your town, or there's 5 cases, or I remember because we live by the Paramus nursing home, so that was like 50 cases, and it was just a whole thing, and the whole town would get alarmed, and it's because one case could potentially mean 100 cases. We knew that if there was one person that had fallen under COVID, then that was such a potent thing that the entire region was susceptible, right? That was our mentality. Sometimes we forget that faith is supposed to be a potent thing. That actually, if there's one case of salvation in your area, that we should be getting an alarm, because that means your whole region is susceptible to Jesus Christ and the good news. There is salvation power to the good news. And when one person gets saved, there is change. Change is the proof of salvation. And today's story is going to be a story about salvation and joy, and how a restorative work begins in an area amongst a people group. But the thing is, if you and I know anything, change is hard. And oftentimes, when you get ignited with faith and redemptive power in you, when resurrection power begins within you, it immediately has friction with your old self. And there will always be reminders in your environment of your old self. Not only from the atmosphere, but also from the people. And so whenever somebody begins in salvation, it starts with joy, and then there's a friction. There's a friction with the people of your past. There's a friction with your atmosphere. And oftentimes that friction keeps us from wanting to continue with the change. It's kind of like, I don't know how many of you have left your hometown, but if you've left your hometown, it's like that feeling of taking a drive through your hometown and your childhood area. It's one of the worst feelings of all time. I grew, my middle school, high school years were in the suburbs of Chicago, and whenever I go back, I'm like, ugh. It's like you just don't like that feeling, because it reminds you of who you were. It reminds you of your old self. For some of us, you may have the hope and the joy and salvation and all that in you. However, what may be keeping you back is that friction, that reminder of what once was, the reminder of what you used to be. And so with that being said, I want us to just dive into today's passage. Luke 19, verse 1 to 10, if you will follow with me. It says, Jesus entered Jericho and was passing through. A man was there by the name of Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was wealthy. By the way, just a little bit of context, if you were a tax collector, then you were instantly marginalized from your society and your community. You were just someone people did not like. Now, if you were a chief tax collector, the extra don't like you, okay? And then not only that, you're wealthy amongst your own people that are still struggling, right? Because the Jewish people were being unfairly taxed, and there was a lot of injustice to that. There was a lot of financial oppression, physical oppression for the Jewish people. So to see one of them side with the Roman people and get wealth off of their own family, off of their own people, you could automatically assume that this chief tax collector who was wealthy was hated by his community. So he was a pariah, okay? So let's keep going. He wanted to see who Jesus was, but because he was short, he could not see over the crowd. So he ran ahead and climbed a sycamore fig tree to see him, since Jesus was coming that way. When Jesus reached the spot, he looked up and said to him, Zacchaeus, come down immediately. I must stay at your house today. So he came down at once and welcomed him gladly. All the people saw this and began to mutter, he has gone to be the guest of a sinner. But Zacchaeus stood up and said to the Lord, look, Lord, here and now I give half of my possessions to the poor. And if I have cheated anybody out of anything, I will pay back 4 times the amount. Jesus said to him, today, salvation has come to this house because this man too is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and to save the lost. So how can we tap into the gospel power in our lives? What it took to change. How can we taste this joy? How can we experience the healing of the Holy Spirit? For some of you, you may feel as though, okay, Jesus seems to be a little overly advertised on Sundays and underwhelming on Mondays. Like he just seems like this great thing, so amazing, the answer to all my problems, but where is the power? Where is this experience? And some of you may be very familiar with church and how to do church. And you get it. You get the whole believing in Jesus thing. Do the right thing. Tithe on Sundays. You get it. But you may have still to experience this change. So what does it take? How do you tap into the gospel power? It starts with this. Luke 19, verse 3. It says he was trying to see who Jesus was, but he was not able. Luke 19, verse 3. This is so subtle, brief, short, but this basically sums up the condition of the soul before salvation. This basically sums up what pre-salvation, pre-saved, pre-healing, pre-redemption, this is what it looks like. He was trying to see who Jesus was, but he was not able. Basically to say he could not see Jesus. For his reason here was he was too short. For some of us, it may not be that we are physically short, but for some of us, we may be prideful. For some of us, we may only see traditions and we may not see Jesus. For some of us, we may only see our discouragements, but we may not be able to see Jesus. For some of us, we may be only able to see who failed us, but not able to see Jesus. If you want change, you have to first see Jesus. If you want the power of heaven, because if you think about it, if God is all powerful and heaven is perfect, then there's probably storehouses of blessings and rewards and all that stuff. And if faith in Christ is that potent, it doesn't start by acting the part. It doesn't start by being a pretender of Christian form, but it starts by being able to see Jesus. But for a lot of us, we may not be able to see Jesus. We may be only able to see the flaws of the church. We may be only able to see our own failures, that one thing that we did years ago that we just can't get over. For some of us, we may not be able to get over our own selves. I once chased after a youth group student who had such an extreme encounter with God at a retreat, and then he failed morally like the week after. He went right back to drugs and, inappropriate relations and all that stuff. The other deacon of the church and I, we had to chase this youth group kid down because his mom said he ran away. Like he just just lost it. He just threw a tantrum, said he hates God and all that stuff. And we found him. And later I had a meeting with him at Panera. And he said, I just can't do the Christian thing. And I asked why. And he says, because I know that God will forgive me and I will keep failing and he will keep forgiving me. And I just don't think that's right. And me being a not so wise 19-year-old Bible study counselor in a church that had very little training, told him, it's not about you. And you have to get over it. Right? Funnily enough, there was grace enough for that. And he actually said that was the most life-changing conversation of his life. And he's a church planter, a senior pastor of a church in Southern California, and he's doing great, right? But there was just something about, he could not see Jesus because all he could see was himself. You guys get what I'm saying? You want to tap into gospel power, you don't want to do this whole fake charade, and you want the real thing, then you can't see me. You can't see the Mosaic sign out the door. You can't see one another. You have to see Jesus. But let's say you cannot. What do? Full context for this passage. Okay, here's the context, right? Because I just read Luke 19, right? 1 to 10. This is actually Luke 18, right before. A ruler asked him, good teacher, what must I do to inherit eternal life? Why do you call me good? Jesus asked him. No one is good except for God alone. You know the commandments. Do not commit adultery. Do not murder. Do not steal. Do not bear false witness. Honor your father and mother. I kept all these from my youth, he said. That's what the ruler said. I kept all these from my youth. When Jesus heard this, he told him, you still lack one thing. Sell all you have and distribute it to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come follow me. After he heard this, he became extremely sad because he was very rich. So very interesting. Here's a rich man that was talking to Jesus right before, and then Jesus ran into another rich man who was a chief tax collector, Zacchaeus. Two very completely different outcomes. Both rich men conversed with Jesus, wanted Jesus, pursued Jesus, but this man came out with nothing, completely unchanged. Whereas Zacchaeus, his entire life, and I dare say the rest of his eternity, changed. So what was the difference? Let's compare. The rich young ruler wanted to know how to add Jesus to his life. Zacchaeus wanted to know how to be a part of Jesus' life. We live in a time where if you're not Christian, then to live for yourself is a virtue. It's actually considered righteousness to live for yourself. It's actually a value, a zeitgeist of our time, if you will. You do you. I'ma get mine. I'ma do me. Right? Like that's the air of today's generation. It's almost considered righteous to look out for yourself and pursue your own desires. Oftentimes, as Christians, unknowingly, all we do is just use Christian methodology and apply that to that worldly virtue. And we call ourselves Christians. And we actually never really experience Christ. Because we basically say, okay, I'm going to do me, but now I'm going to pray to get it. Now I'm going to become a good person to get it. And that's what the rich young ruler was trying to do. He was like, okay, I have everything. I've done everything. But he realized something was missing. Unless you are saved, there's always going to be something missing. Unless you know Jesus, there's going to be something missing. And if you feel like something is missing, I would say honor that. Don't dismiss that. If something is missing, honor that. Don't bury it with busyness. Don't try to cover it with accomplishment. Because your soul is trying to tell you something. And the rich young ruler realized something was missing, but his mistake was he was just trying to add Jesus to his life, whereas Zacchaeus was willing to do anything just to be a part of Jesus' life. It's very different. The rich young ruler also wanted to keep his status, his pride, his achievements, his name, his status quo, his control, and his plans, and add Jesus to the mix. Lord, bless my business. God, give me joy for this day. Give me strength to execute my plans. Help me to fulfill my destiny. God, give me grace to fulfill my dreams. And that's basically the only prayers that this rich young ruler probably had. And so when Jesus, okay, this is not to say that every Christian is mandated to just give up everything and just walk around in the streets. Okay, let's not do that. Okay, if you want to give up everything, the giving scan code is out the door. You could just letting you know. Okay. But the reason why Jesus was telling him, give up these things and follow me, was because it was a question of, are you just trying to use me as a trinket to add to your life? Or are you trying to give me your life? Salvation begins when you choose to follow Jesus more than your plans. The person of Jesus. And if you don't even know what that means it's time to introduce yourself to the person of Jesus. Right? He wanted to keep all these things, but what does Zacchaeus do? Zacchaeus was willing to be like a child to know Jesus. Back then, rich men with status did not run. It just wasn't what they did. But the fact that he ran and climbed up a tree because he had this childlike curiosity. He was willing to be like a child. You know that saying, do you remember in the passage in the Bible when they try to bring children to Jesus? Right? And the disciples tried to stop the children and Jesus rebuked them. He says, unless you're like them, you're not even going to enter the kingdom of heaven. When's the last time you were childlike in your pursuit of God? Or have we become good grown-ups? Have we just become too cool to pursue God? You know how I knew I was with the right man? Let me tell you. Okay, let me tell you. Let me tell you. I was once speaking at a youth conference. This is years ago. I mean, I'm talking like, I don't remember how many years ago. Like maybe 15, 16 years. And I was speaking at a youth conference. And my husband, well, back then he was like my fiance or something. And then he was my plus one. So he was just there just to accompany me. And this is a youth conference of like fifth graders, sixth graders, you know. And I remember I preached about salvation and the Holy Spirit, and I did an altar call. All these little fifth, sixth graders came up to the altar, including my husband. And I remember he was raising his hands, and his hands were so high that two fifth grade boys were able to fit underneath his elbows. You know? And so here is this grown man who's like, I don't care the fact that this is a youth conference and I'm a full-grown adult. It does not matter. He became childlike in his pursuit of Jesus. If you're not going to be a fool for Jesus on earth, you're going to be a fool for the rest of eternity. Choose what kind of fool you want to be. Does it make sense? I want to remind everyone that we are all eternal beings. Every single person here, we're all eternal. Choose your eternity. Choose your forever. What forever are you going to choose? I'd rather be a fool here than a fool forever. And sometimes being foolish is being childish. You know, it's so funny because I have one son, right? Is he out there? No. Okay. I have one son. And, he's 10. But I don't know when machismo enters into a young man. The other day, I tried to put him on my lap, and he was like, Mommy, I'm like the biggest boy, right? Like, what are you doing? And I told him, son, I wiped your butt, and you will always be a baby to me. He's like, whatever, right? But sometimes we're like that with God. God, I'm like a full adult, right? I don't raise my hand during worship. God, I'm like a full adult, right? Let me check my 401k before I give right now. Like, I'm an adult, right? I got plans, Scott. I got plans. I don't just randomly obey stuff. I don't pick up chairs and put them down. Like, I don't do that, God. Sometimes we're just too mature for God. And God's like, I put your cells together in your mother's womb. Like, you know what I'm saying? With God, we're always going to be a child. So are you going to pursue Jesus with childlike faith, or are we going to be too much of an adult for him? Right? The promise in the Bible is in James 4:8. Draw near to God, and he will draw near to you. That's just a promise. You pursue God, it will always come out as a positive investment. I don't know what the craze is about investments these days, but, they say, and this is just like a side comment, they say millennials are like the most screwed over generation, because we were promised things. We were promised like an adulthood that made sense, like our parents' generations were able to buy a house with coins and blueberries, but us, it's like you need $2 million to afford to live in Bergen County, It's wild, right? And so it's like we were promised that if we get a bachelor's degree, that we'll get jobs and we could afford a real life. That was like the biggest lie. Gen Z, the generation after millennials, you know what they're doing? They're not going to college anymore. They want to become influencers. They're investing in NFTs and Bitcoin. You guys get what it's wild. So millennials are like so depressed and tired and overworked because we're just like, I don't know if that was worthy of an investment. Any investment you place in your faith will always come out for you as a positive. You will always come out in profit. You draw near to God, he will draw near to you. He's not going to hesitate. He's not going to hold back. He will draw near to you. For some of us, pursuing Jesus may feel like trying to find a needle in a haystack. It is not that. Pursuing Jesus is like a baby crying in a crib. Your parent already knows you and already knows where you are. Zacchaeus thought he was trying to get a glimpse of a stranger. He later realized that that stranger was already his friend. Jesus already knew his name. Jesus already accepted him. Jesus met him where he was. He was unable to see Jesus. It did not matter. He just had to pursue Jesus. Be childlike. And Jesus did the rest. You have this much ability to pursue Jesus, Jesus will do the rest. Right? You have this much spiritual hunger and ability to find Jesus, Jesus will do the rest. Does that make sense? That's called grace. It's not finding a needle in a haystack. It's just being in a crib crying out to a parent because he already knows you. He already knows your name. He already loves you and accepts you. He already knows where you are. You know, I remember I used to work with an orphanage in Asia. I know that's very subtle, but like it's, you know, it was very covert. But basically it was an area where orphans were just being thrown away. Like it was a crisis, right? And one of my mentors, and we were working together on this, she said that when she used to try to get involved with the state-run orphanage in that area, her being an American, it took a bit to get their trust. And eventually, after months of dropping off fruit and going in and doing some janitorial work and basically gaining their trust, they started to let her in on the details of how this orphanage is run. They first showed her the first room, and it was about eight babies. And they were all crying. They were all like on the crib, clawing to get out, and they were all crying. And then afterwards, they would open the door and she would go into the next room, which was a very large room, and it had about 60 babies. And she said there was no crying. Because what they do is they would train the orphans to believe that their cries were pointless. So when you do not believe that you will be met with a loving embrace when you cry, you will stop crying. Some of us, we are spiritual orphans. We have stopped crying out to God because we believe that he will not answer and that he will not meet us. We will not climb the sycamore tree. We will not run past a crowd because we may lament over how short we are, how incapable of seeing him we are. But cry we must. Pursue him we must. Draw near to him we must. We must maintain that childlike curiosity of Jesus, because that is the start of our salvation experience. Because from there, Jesus will meet you. And from there, you will know him. How change begins. The more you seek, the more you will discover how seen you are, how loved you are. I mean, Zacchaeus, he was just over the moon. I mean, here he is. His parents probably hate him. His siblings probably hate him. Everybody hates him because he chose the life that he chose. But here he is, already known, already seen, already embraced by Christ. If it's been a while since you've experienced this, that means that it is high time for us to renew our childlike pursuit and curiosity of Christ. Keep seeking, and the more you will discover, right? And as you discover, you must welcome. It says that Zacchaeus joyfully welcomed. Some of us, we are playing a little too hard to get with Jesus. You guys get what I'm saying? I joke with my husband that it's a joke, but it's also true. I said, I'm a leaky bucket. What I mean by that is, you do something nice for me on Monday, I'm going to ask you on Tuesday if you still love me. I always tell him, I'm a leaky bucket, but I'm your bucket. He's like, yeah. I go, do you even like me? And he's like, babe, I just made coffee for you. I made breakfast for you. I did all this for you. I'm like, I know, but, I'm a leaky bucket. But sometimes, at a certain point, you got to choose to stop being a leaky bucket. You know what I'm saying? But some of us, we're like that with God. Jesus is like, excuse me, have you seen the cross? Have you reviewed the gospel? Have you seen that I came from heaven to earth? I could have come as a rich man, but I came as a child, fully embodying humanity. And I lived through every temptation, and I suffered every kind of betrayal because I love you. Right? And some of us, we're just playing a little hard to get with Jesus. Like, I'll give you my all if you show up to me in a dream one day or something. I'll give you my all when I feel it. But today I don't feel it. You may not feel it just because you may need a nap. You know what I'm saying? But for those that know, we must joyfully welcome. We must joyfully welcome. And you could choose to do that. It's so funny because you know how we just started youth ministry, right? Which I'm so elated by. And parents of youth group parents, you should be very, very proud of our youth team. Like they have been doing a phenomenal job. But now I get reports of what our preteens are talking about. And apparently they're very anical little fellas over there. They got all these like, but what about this? But what about that? What about this? And I remember once Hayadeen, one of our youth leaders, she came up to me. She's like, I tried my best, but I hope they got it, And I'm like, some of us, we're like that adults are still like that with God. But what about my car, God? But what about my paycheck, God? But what about my this, God? What about my that? But what about all that he's already done? What about all that he's already done for you? How much are we going to live our lives wasting this one chance to have faith? In heaven, we're not going to need faith. In heaven, faith is not required because it's going to be right there with us. We're going to see his glory. We're going to see the perfection. We're not going to have to try to enjoy God. It's just going to happen. This is our one chance to say, Jesus, I believed even when I did not feel. Jesus, I believed even when everything that I didn't want to happen, happened. Jesus, I believed even there was no proof to my faith. This is our one chance. Can we joyfully welcome God's love and invitation as Zacchaeus did? Now, lastly, as all this happens, your formation will begin to influence your environment instead of your environment influencing your formation. So you know how we talked about how faith is potent. If we do it as it should be done, they should be having alarms on our phones when someone gets saved to show, oh, there's a child of God in your midst. Watch out. Because their faith is contagious. Your formation will begin to influence your environment. Your environment will not influence your formation. The effects of salvation isn't just on the one, but it's on their family, It's on their friends. It's in their workplace. It's in their town. This is how it should be. This is why there are such things as church plants. Church plants are not supposed to grow by borrowing sheep from other churches. Church plants are supposed to grow as people get saved, and they're so contagious that even more get saved. So if you are about the salvation thing and the evangelism thing and the real kingdom thing, then you're in the right place, because this is a church plant, right? It's not about playing this religious game of entertaining one another on Sundays and borrowing from other buildings. No, it's about being so contagious that other people catch on fire while they are in your midst. And so if faith in you is true, then the people around you should watch out, because healing is coming their way. Restoration, redemption is coming their way. And why? It has to start with that salvation experience. For some of you, you may be like, I've been saved since I was 8 and nobody around me has ever experienced that. I may encourage you to revisit how much you know Jesus. And maybe it's time for a revival, a fresh encounter, and stirring up that childlike curiosity to know Jesus once again, for real this time, right? Because an encounter with Jesus completely changes the way you relate with your environment. And I will close with this. If you know Jesus, truly know Jesus, you're no longer taking from your environment, you're now giving to your environment. Zacchaeus was like, hey, I'm here to make things right. See how his salvation was bringing restoration to his realm of influence. Sin always brings damage to those around you. Salvation brings healing. And he's like, I'm going to make this right. I'm going to pay them back fourfold. I'm going to bring healing. I'm going to restore. I'm going to make things right. He's no longer functioning from debt. He's no longer taking, but now he's giving. When's the last time you were a generous giver? When you know Jesus, you're no longer entitled and fighting for your rights. You lay down your rights. Zacchaeus was willing to give more than he actually owed. It's his right to keep what he doesn't owe. But he was like, I don't care about that. A heart so full that even if someone wrongs you, you're able to forgive. A heart so full. When someone's threatening your rights, you're able to be a peacemaker still. Even though people were criticizing him, he was no longer pricked by criticism because he was so full and welling up from the divine acceptance from his Jesus, from his Messiah. You know, because people's criticisms of us, it hurts. It cuts us down. For some of us, it's like 1,000 paper cuts. It may not affect you in the beginning, but it will wear you down. Perhaps it's time to know and remember how supernaturally, fully, thoroughly accepted you are by Christ. And he was little in the eyes of humankind. To people, he was little Zacchaeus, too short. But what he did for the kingdom was big. Your shortcomings, your limitations is just an invitation for God to give you more grace and to move through your life. And what it does, it moves you from being a spectator and pitying those around you into a peacemaker and restorer and a participant. And you become contagious people around you begin to change. You don't become an evangelist by trying to be an evangelist. You become an evangelist by falling in love with Jesus and knowing his embrace. Then people start to change around you. I was the second person to become saved in my family. And the testimony of my father and my sister was simply this. One day, Faith came back home completely changed. And she had a joy that we've never seen before. And one day I wanted to have what she had. That was their testimony. I didn't force the Bible down their throat. Although, hey, if that works, fine, that's fine, you know. But you become salt of the earth. Maybe it's time to become salty again. You know? When's the last time people felt light from you, healing from you, encouragement from you, more of Jesus from you? You know, people are a lot more spiritual than you think. They don't need your gimmicks. They just need Jesus in you. You know, my husband and I, once in a blue moon, we like to go and have a meal in the city. I remember last time we were eating at an Italian restaurant in the city, and the waiter looked at me. He said, "Girl, you just got some good energy. I just feel good energy from you." I'm like, that's the Holy Spirit. People are a lot more spiritual than you think. Maybe it's time to be real Christians today. And if you find that you've never known Christ, that you can't see him, I invite you, after this service, I'm going to be in the front. I would love to walk you through it. And I would love for today to be the day where you start being a fool on earth so you could be a son and daughter for the rest of eternity. Can we all rise?